Shalom Aleichem, welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's program, Jews of Florida, Centuries of Stories, with Marcia Jo Zerivitz. Before we get started, a few housekeeping rules, which are that your audio and video will be off throughout the program. You may send us your questions via the question panel at the lower right of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from comments so that we can try to get to all of your questions this evening. I'm delighted to introduce Marcia Jo Zerowitz. Marcia Jo is LHD Founding Executive Director, Jewish Museum of Florida. She's been a trailblazing community leader in Florida for more than 60 years, observing the Jewish community between 1984 and 1992. She collected stories and material evidence to document the nearly 500 years of local Jewish history, resulting in an archive and the Jewish Museum of Florida on Miami Beach. She was awarded an honorary doctorate from Florida International University in 2016, initiated legislation for Florida Jewish History Month and Jewish American Heritage Month, and has authored more than 100 exhibits, films, articles, and books. Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me to share a sampling of compelling stories that I collected about Jews of Florida. This is my book. It's very heavy. It's 5 pounds, and I'm going to share with you some of what I learned. I wrote the book on what was once a hidden history. Why did I write this book? First, even though Florida is the nation's third largest Jewish community and probably the first place where Jews arrived in what became the United States, no one else had done the research, and that was shocking to me. Second, to debunk myths, like the notion that the history started on Miami Beach post World War II. And in reality, it was probably in St. Augustine 348 years prior, but surely 150 years prior in Pensacola. And fourth, because third, it's important to have Jewish memories for Jewish continuity. And fourth, because this history is always critical and always timely, with the staggering rise in anti-Semitism in the United States and globally. Education is a critical component that can help to reverse the dangerous trend we are witnessing. Florida has the nation's second largest number of hate groups. Massachusetts has at least 12 white supremacist networks. Hate propaganda against Jews is all around us with continuous assault. I do a separate lecture on the roots of anti-Semitism. My lifelong passion has been Jewish continuity, which today is threatened by anti-Semitism. I believe that what helps most is to tell stories about how Jews have contributed to the rich fabric of our diverse nation since its founding 250 years ago, to improve the quality of life for all people, and to raise pride in Jews, especially the young. The word history contains the word story. Jews are storytellers. Little had been revealed about Florida Jewish history up to 1984. From where I lived in Orlando, I spent the next 8 years on the road, traveling 250,000 miles throughout Florida to set up and manage volunteer task forces for the grassroots research, to collect oral histories, photographs, documents, and artifacts that flesh out this story. Most people think that no one could be a Florida native, or surely not have parents and grandparents born in Florida. For the past 42 years, I have asked a lot of questions. The collected answers and material evidence resulted in a huge story. It was the thrill of the hunt, and the reward was finding the collective historic memory for Florida's Jews. History is people, people who effect change, who make the world a better place, people who inspire. Being a product of the 1940s and 50s public schools, when I began the research in the 1980s, my inclination was to go to the public library, but there were no books on this subject. I went to the state archives in Tallahassee where they had thousands of categories, except nothing for Jews. And this was before personal computers, Google, Wikipedia, or cell phones, if you can imagine that. But what I did find was this in the section for the citrus industry in Florida. The archivist did not even know that it said Florida in Yiddish. The owners of the company were not Jewish, but they were shipping fruit to New York City in the 1930s and wanted to appeal to the Jewish market. Very clever, right? This is one example of how I did the research, beginning with oral histories. It is 1986, before cell phones, Google, and Wikipedia, as I mentioned, and I am in Jacksonville, Florida, interviewing Rosalie and Robert Coleman about his grandfather, George Delinsky. In 1857, George was the first boy born in Florida to a Jewish family that planted roots in the state and has continued to live here as Jews since 1850. I ask if they have any of George's personal possessions. Rosalie chimes in, well, I have his pocket watch with Hebrew numerals that he carried his entire life. It's in the safety deposit box at the bank, and no one in the family even knows that I have it. Would you like to see it? I say absolutely. And at the bank, I ask if she would donate it to help tell our story of Jewish life in Florida. She says yes. This is how the material evidence and collective historic memories of Jewish life in Florida were retrieved, piece by piece. The family continues to live in Jacksonville and has 75 descendants in Florida into the eighth generation. After a traveling exhibit, our board decided to find a site for a permanent museum for our archives and to continue to tell stories. I found these abandoned, at that time very deteriorated synagogues on South Beach that were about to be torn down. They were the home of Miami Beach's first congregation. I raised the money to restore and adapt them. We opened in 1995. Now for a few samples of the stories that I found. I became a Florida history and news junkie and making the Jewish connection to the stories that I found. From 2013 to 2021, Marty Barron was executive editor of the Washington Post, a position he formerly had held at the Miami Herald. In 1954, he was born in Tampa, Florida, where he grew up. His parents had immigrated from Israel and had every news resource available in the home so they could learn about their new country. Barron's role as editor of the Boston Globe was highlighted in the movie Spotlight. He led the 2003 investigation into a cover up of sexual abuse by priests within the Boston Archdiocese. Newsrooms under his leadership earned 17 Pulitzer Prizes. His nonfiction fiction book came out in 2023 that reflects the epic power struggle between politics, money, media, and tech. Five-time Emmy Award winner Jeff Zucker was president of the CNN Worldwide from 2013 until 2022. He was born and raised in Miami. In fact, I got this picture from his mother. Marion and Joe Breckner dedicated their lives to press information issues. Joe spearheaded two significant battles that set national precedents. One, to lift press restrictions on the space program, resulting in today's live and uncensored press access, and two, how cameras could be used in the courtrooms. When he died, his wife Marion donated funds to the Yiddish Book Center for cultural programming, and now there's a Breckner exhibit hall as well. The fund, or I think it's called the Breckner Gallery, the fund is a supporter of Your Pockenträger magazine. Sheryl Sandberg was number two at Facebook for 14 years. She grew up in North Miami Beach. Some of you may have read Lean In, one of her books that came out in 2013, encouraging women to assert themselves at work and at home. Since stepping down from what is now Meta, Sandberg has been fighting abortion restrictions in state houses and speaking out against Hamas's sexual violence against Israeli women. You may have this item at the checkout counter of your grocery store. We do here in Florida. In the 1940s, Adolf Levis worked out of his garage, selling spices, pickles, pickled pig's feet, tomatoes, and cabbages to bars and delicatessens. Then he had a local meat packer concoct a small, easy to eat dried beef stick for snacking called Slim Jim. Levis sold the company to General Mills in 1967. Then he moved to Boca Raton, Florida, and donated large funds to the Jewish Federation of South Beach County and the Boca Raton Jewish Community Center, which was renamed the Levis Jewish Community Center. Spanx founder Sarah Blakely was born and raised in Clearwater, Florida, and attended Florida State University. In 2000, Oprah Winfrey named Spanx her favorite product, and sales took off, reaching 1 million in its first year and 10 million in its second year. Forbes touted her as the youngest self-made billionaire in the entire world in 2012. Spanx is now available in 50 countries. Chico's, an American women clothing and accessories retailer, was founded in 1983 on Sanibel Island, Florida, by Helene Graunik. The company is headquarters in Fort Myers, Florida, and operates Chico's, White House Black Market, and Soma for a total of more than 1,400 stores. Robert Rubin was sworn in as the 70th U.S. Secretary of the Treasury in 1995. As a fourth grader, Rubin moved with his family from New York to Miami Beach. He graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1956 from Harvard summa cum laude, then a law degree from Yale. Rubin is co-chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, The Yellow Pad, is an essential guide for anyone looking to make better decisions in life, work, and public policy. So, when did Florida Jewish history begin? Most are not aware that Jews could not live in Florida for 250 years after Florida was discovered in 1513. This is when Ponce de Leon first reached Florida's east coast, found the natives hostile, and named the new land La Florida after Pascua Florida, the Feast of Flowers, as it was Easter time. Because this was during the Inquisition, which was from 1478 to 1834, and Ponce de Leon sailed for Spain, which then owned Florida, only Catholics could live here for the next 250 years, until 1763. This is when the Treaty of Paris was signed in Paris, France, following the French and Indian War. In this treaty, Spain ceded Florida to Britain, and people other than Catholics could finally settle, including Jews. These 1765 Pensacola Council minutes reflect the names of 3 Jews who arrived in 1763: Alexander Solomons, Joseph de Palacios, and Samuel Israel bought property and stores and did business with the British and others, selling wood and other dry goods. We were taught that the first Jews arrived in America in 1654 in New Amsterdam, that became New York, after sailing from Recife, Brazil, to escape the Inquisition there. When I began research, it was my hypothesis that it was possible that American Jewish history started in Florida in 1565 in St. Augustine with conversos. Historians note that the third Florida governor, Pedro Menendez Marquez, could have been a converso, and there are Spanish Jewish names on lists of soldiers and settlers in St. Augustine in 1565. And now, as a result of research by the St. Augustine Jewish Historical Society that organized in 2011, we now know that Antonio Martinez Carvajal, who was chief harbor pilot in St. Augustine in 1577 and 78, was the first person of Jewish descent to live in what would become the United States. That is 77 years prior to Jews arriving in New York in 1654. Continuing research reveals more about Jews in the 16th century in St. Augustine. Florida is usually overlooked when writing American Jewish history, and now we can say that the history between 1492 and 1654 needs to be rewritten to include Florida. Before this research, we did know that 200 years ago, 26 years before Florida's 1845 statehood, one Jew took advantage of the development opportunities. No photo exists of Moses Levy, only this house drawing based on his writings. In 1820, a year before Florida became a U.S. territory, Moses Levy, a Moroccan Jew born in 1782, began purchasing 100,000 acres in Florida. His area spread from around Gainesville, south to Sanford, and west to Tampa Bay. Levy formed the Florida Association, which was the first development corporation in Florida. Moses Levy, the most important person in early Florida Jewish history, built his 1,000-acre pilgrimage plantation just south of Gainesville. It was intended as a refuge for European Jews who were oppressed. There they could become farmers in a communitarian settlement, the first on U.S. soil. Frederick Warburg of the famous German banking family was his recruiting agent in Europe. At least 5 German Jewish families lived there, including Warburg himself. Lake Warburg at the University of Florida is actually named for him. Pilgrimage was a fully functioning plantation that lasted from 1822 to 1835. Its main commodity was sugar cane, which Levy introduced to Florida. Moses Levy was Florida's first education commissioner, an advocate of public schools, and instrumental in establishing Florida's first free public school in St. Augustine, and a founder of Micanopy, Florida's oldest inland town. Published in London, England in 1828, this is the earliest and most important anti-slavery document by an American Jew. Even in Florida's slave economy, Moses Levy was a progressive, a vigorous advocate for the gradual abolition of slavery and the humane treatment of enslaved people. A similar movement in Florida at that time would have placed him and his plantation in serious jeopardy, so he kept his views out of the public when he lived there. He freed children of slaves after they received a vigorous education that included farming skills. Moses Levy was the father of David Levy Yulee, Florida's first United States Senator and the first U.S. Senator of Jewish heritage in American history. There had been 2 Jewish senators from Florida. The second was Richard Stone, 1975 to 1980. David moved to Pilgrimage at the age of 17 and lived there for 4 years, helping his father run the plantation. Then he wanted to become a lawyer, but there were no law schools. You had to apprentice. So he moved to Tallahassee and apprenticed with a lawyer there, was admitted to the bar in 1836, and got involved in politics. Florida became the 27th state in 1845 under the leadership of David Levy Yulee. He helped draft Florida's Constitution and worked hard for statehood when there were about 60,000 people in Florida that included about 100 Jews. He faced anti-Semitism in the U.S. Senate. Vice President John Quincy Adams referred to him as that, quote, alien Jew delegate from Florida, end quote, even though he had gone through citizenship proceedings twice. He served as senator until the secession of Florida from the Union and served in a Union prison for 1 year. Yulee was the family's ancestral name from Morocco, a name he added to Levy when he went to Washington. David Levy Yulee was important both in politics and in the economy of Florida. In 1861, he formed Florida Railroad Company, the first cross-state rail system that went from Fernandina to Cedar Key. Goods arriving from Florida could for the first time be shipped across the state. The railroad operated for 80 years. The town of Yulee near Jacksonville and the Yulee Sugar Mill in Homosassa are among the places in Florida named for him. During World War II, there was a U.S. Liberty ship named for him. Moses Levy's plantation was destroyed at the start of the Second Seminole War in 1835. Here I introduce another important Jewish person in early Florida history, Abraham Myers, for whom the city of Fort Myers is named on the west coast of Florida. This Florida map reflects the sequence of the earliest documentation I found of Jewish life in communities around the state. The first is Pensacola, way over on the western end, and there's a little appendage out there. Number 2 was Micanopy in 1819. That's where Moses Levy had his plantation. Tallahassee was third. It was in 1837. It was chosen as the capital in 1824. Key West, all the way down to the tip of the state in the 1840s, Jews arrived from Europe, mostly from Romania, by ship directly into Jacksonville in 1840. Into Key West in 1840s. Jacksonville, 1841. Tampa, 1844. And I want to point out that this is 48 years before there was any South Florida. You notice I have not mentioned South Florida because it did not exist. Ocala, North Central Florida in the 1850s. Orlando, 1865, right after the Civil War, Palm Beach, 1892, and Miami, 1892, both in anticipation of Henry Flagler's railroad, which was coming down the East Coast and which opened up South Florida. Then we have St. Petersburg in 1901, where I live. Davie in Broward County was in 1910. Sarasota and Miami Beach, 1913. Fort Lauderdale, 1915. Boca Raton, which today hosts the state's largest Jewish population, started in 1931. Now it has about 238,000 Jews. Then in Southwest Florida, in the Fort Myers, Naples area, Jews did not settle until the 1950s due to restrictive covenants. The Moses Levy family is no longer Jewish. So who is the longest continuing Jewish family in Florida? The Delinsky family, who came with the Delinsky family, who came to America in the 1840s, which connects back to the watch I showed you earlier. By 1850, Philip Delinsky on the top left was the first to arrive in Jacksonville. He brought the father, the mother had died in the crossing from Europe, and 8 siblings. They all settled in Jacksonville. Philip married a Jewish woman, Ida Ehrlich. Their children born in Jacksonville were in the top photograph there in the center. George, who had the pocket watch, was born in 1857, and Regina, his sister, was born in 1859. In the 1880s, Philip's brother Morris, on the top right, was mayor of Jacksonville and first president of a Haveth Hesed congregation in Jacksonville, which was the second congregation in Florida. And then in the lower right is their sister, Helena. Helena married Robert Williams, a Jewish businessman and cotton plantation owner in Tallahassee. They had 5 daughters, and what was truly remarkable was they all married Jews. This was a real statement of their adherence to tradition, right? This is an 1897 photo of their family in front of their Tallahassee home. In spite of not being wanted, Jews have contributed hugely to the history and development of the Sunshine State. In fact, there are many firsts that I reveal in my book. Another daughter of Helena and Robert was Mina Williams, a third generation of Florida Jew, and she was the first Miss Florida in 1885. I'm proud of the Jewish pioneer women who lived in Florida. I always say BAC, before air conditioning. Henrietta Cohn was born in Germany in 1844. Henry Brash, in the lower photograph, immigrated from Germany, and after serving in the Civil War, he settled in Apalachicola, which is on the west coast, and brought over Henrietta to be his bride. They built a large home in Apalachicola called the Porches. It still exists as an historic monument, and had 11 children in that house. She helped manage their many businesses and kept a kosher home. Using a set of dishes, this is one plate from the set that she brought from Germany. She prepared and served Shabbat dinners and Passover seders right on the beach. She made all the clothing for her children, including their wedding gowns. She outlived her husband by nearly 3 decades and managed to leave money to every grandchild when she died in Apalachicola in 1931. Her descendants are still Jewish. Another major pioneer family are the Benjamins. Born in Prussia, Simon Benjamin, in the top left there, immigrated to Florida at the age of 16 in 1865, right after the Civil War. He established a business in the village of Waldo. Simon stayed in Waldo for 3 years until he was run out of town by the Ku Klux Klan and moved to Ocala. He and other family members started a railroad to connect the area and opened Florida's first known ice making plant. Imagine, this was a time when there were no refrigerators in which to store and preserve meats or electricity to operate them if they had existed. Many homes contained ice boxes, and the Benjamins delivered ice on wagons. He was president of the temple in Ocala and on the school board. Simon, in the circle, in the red center in the circle, moved his family into Jacksonville in 1901. Jews moved around the state according to economic opportunities, and Jacksonville was a very up and coming prominent community. There he began a cigar and tobacco business and served as president of the congregation Haveth Hesed, which I mentioned earlier was founded in 1882. So by now he's already president of 2 temples. His son, Roy Benjamin, also on the back row in a red circle, became an architect who was acclaimed for theaters. He designed more than 200 movie theaters, one in nearly every Florida town. On the top right is an example of one of his theaters, which is in Palm Beach County, and today is the seat of the Cultural Council in Palm Beach County. The stories are so much fun. Meet Saul Snyder, cattleman in St. Augustine. In 1904, after serving in the Russian army, he left and was sent by the Jewish Agricultural Society to Fernandina Beach. Then in 1908, he settled in St. Augustine because he made the 10th man for a minion there. He first had a small grocery store, bought a cow, developed a cattle ranch, and eventually was a founder of the Florida Cattlemen's Association in the 1950s when cattle was the state's largest industry. His cattle brand was the Mogan David, and his ranch was named Bar Mitzvah. I love that. Jews in Florida have from the beginning made a living in retail and wholesale, first as peddlers. Then the peddlers transitioned into mom and pop stores around 130 years ago. This is the Canner family from Hush, Romania. 8 siblings went to 8 different towns in the late 1880s so they would not compete with each other. This is the family in Orlando in 1905 and their store. A fifth generation of that family lives in Miami today. Then there were large department stores opened by Jews. Samuel and Morris Cohen arrived from Ireland in 1867, when Jacksonville was still under military occupation from the Civil War between 1864 and 1869. And they established the Cohen Brothers store. It was a little store. They instituted fixed pricing rather than the typical bargaining. And then in 1912, they built this mammoth department store occupying a full city block. It was the largest structure in the city. In business for 120 years, the building is now Jacksonville's City Hall. This is another of the large department store chains owned by Jews. Abe and Benna Wolf Maas came from Germany to Tampa in 1894. Then brothers joined them. The first Maas Brothers store, shown here, opened in 1896. It was a chain of 39 stores that lasted 105 years and is now incorporated into the Macy's chain. And then Florida developed shopping centers like University Town Center in Sarasota and Aventura Mall in Miami, Florida's largest mall, with 3 million square feet. And talk about largest, Auschwitz survivor Ted Hollow, shown on the top right, who arrived in New York in 1945 with $18. You've heard these stories about Holocaust survivors. In 2018, he opened the tallest building in Florida at 868 feet and 85 stories. It's in Miami with a 2,000 car parking garage costing $800 million. We think that's really big, right? And then consider New York's 28-acre, 25 plus billion-dollar Hudson Yards project developed by Stephen Ross. He graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1958, attended the University of Florida, and became the founding chair of the related companies. Ross is shown here standing on the highest outdoor observation deck in the Western Hemisphere, called the Edge at Hudson Yards, which as of 2021, you too can climb 1,300 feet above Manhattan. Edge is a one-of-a-kind design, suspended in midair, giving you the feeling of floating in the sky with a 360-degree view you can't get anywhere else. My daughter and I had this experience. You look down 100 stories from the glass floor and lean out over the iconic skyline on angled glass walls, where you can see all the way from the tip of Central Park down to the Statue of Liberty. It's quite a thrill, and it was created by a Floridian Jew. Ross also developed the Shed at Hudson Yards, a $478 million center for artistic invention that commissions and presents works by artists from multiple disciplines. In 1996, Ross built City Place, his first mixed-use project in West Palm Beach. The related companies is in the midst right now of a $10 billion project on 72 acres there that combined luxury condos, office, entertainment, and retail in what was a very dormant downtown. Ross owns the Miami Dolphins football team, the first professional sports team in Florida. Many of Florida's sports teams have been owned by Jews. In Miami, there are also the Heat basketball, owned by Mickey Arison, the top right. Where I live in Tampa Bay, all three professional sports teams have been owned by Jews: football, baseball, and ice hockey in the lower right. Florida native Dara Torres was inducted into the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame in 2005. At the University of Florida, Torres earned 28 NCAA All-American Swimming Awards, the most you can win ever. She eclipsed her own American 50-meter freestyle record in 2007 at the age of 40, a mere 15 months after giving birth to her first child. Dara is the only swimmer to compete in 5 Olympics: 1984, 88, 1992, 2000, and 2008, establishing herself as one of the most celebrated female athletes of all time. During World War I, Abe Sonny Sonnabend trained to become a naval aviator in Miami and Pensacola, Florida. He married Esther Levitt in 1920 and built a multi-million-dollar fortune. One project was the Sonesta Hotels, combining the shortened names of its owners, Sonny and Esther, for Sonesta. He bought and operated facilities where Jewish families were welcome, in contrast to the anti Semitic practices of other hotels. This has resulted in a chain currently of 1,200 hotels in 8 countries. His 3 sons and now grandchildren have joined the ranks. Sonny was active in civil rights and a president of the American Jewish Committee in Palm Beach. When I read about space missions, I recall that Harry Kaplan of Melbourne helped develop the spacesuit that astronauts wore for 50 years, and that many Jews were involved in leadership positions at Cape Canaveral and the Martin Company, which was in Orlando. And that the fresh veggies the astronauts eat in space were developed by Betty and Ed Rosenthal's center and right in this photo. They live in Sarasota, and they're founders of Floricon Fertilize Corporation, located in Hardee County, Florida. Floricon was selected as a collaborator with NASA. Look at Betty's feet in this photo that got them circled in red to appreciate the proportion of the size of the lettuce that they grew. Using the Rosenthal's Floricon controlled release fertilizer, this humongous red romaine lettuce was the first crop of lettuce grown in space in just 3 weeks from seed and consumed by the astronauts. Jews had been notable in agriculture in Florida. When immigrants came from Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they mostly had come from places where Jews could not own land or be farmers. Working the land was an attractive way to be independent and support their families. Tobacco and cigars are a large part of the Florida Jewish story. Jews grew tobacco in North Florida beginning in the late 19th century. Most cigar factories were in Key West in the 1880s, then moved to Ybor City, which is part of Tampa, in 1891. This factory and label belonged to the oldest family-owned cigar maker in the United States, now into the 4th generation, and is the last cigar factory in Tampa today that once had 150 factories, many owned by Jews. Note the Cuesta Reyes cigar label with the Mogen David. This was a portrait of the grandmother in the family with the Mogen David around her neck. The brand is now sold in 80 countries. Much earlier in Tampa Bay, Emmeline Miley had settled in Thonotosassa in 1844, a year before Florida became a state. This is 70 years, keep in mind, before any Jews are on Miami Beach. I haven't talked about Miami Beach, right? At age 18, immigrant Emmeline married William Miley only after he agreed to sell his slaves. They cleared land, built a log cabin, and planted the area's first orange grove. Emmeline survived the Indians, raised 12 children, and after William's death, expanded the groves herself. She is buried in 1907 in Thonotosassa, where there is a Miley Road named in her honor. The earliest citrus king in Florida was Dr. Philip Phillips in the Orlando area. In 1897, he was the first known Jew to permanently settle there. By the 1920s, he developed 5,000 acres stretching across 9 central Florida counties. This made Phillips the largest individual citrus grower in the world. He was responsible for several key innovations in the processing and packaging of orange juice. He sold to Minute Maid in 1954 and formed a foundation that supports many cultural, educational, medical facilities, including the Performing Arts Center. And I have a collage of those. The new Performing Arts Center in Orlando is in the lower right. It's a spectacular performing arts hall. Brothers Jules and Jack Freeman settled in Florida in 1953 with $10,000 and developed the largest orange grove in the world at that time, 4 million trees on 24,000 acres in Arcadia, Florida. They accumulated, developed, and sold a total of 89,000 acres or 139 square miles. Now, keep in mind, this is 6 times the size of Manhattan, that is nearly 23 square miles. Driving on I-75 on the West Coast, you pass 2 cities developed by Jews. One is the Freeman San Carlos Park, built in 1955, south of Fort Myers. Also on I-75 on the West Coast, you pass Cape Coral, a 114 square mile city developed in 1957 by Leonard and Julius Rosen, among the largest multiple municipal sized developments in the country, and one that made national news along with San Carlos Park when Category 4 Hurricane Ian hit it in 2022, in September of 2022. Developed on low-lying land, as you can see from the photos, homeowners could dock their boats just feet from their back doors. I say could because after Hurricane Ian, it was impossible to tell the water-filled streets from the canals. There is even a Florida island named for a Jew. Abraham Walkowski settled in Key West in 1885, had a large family and many businesses. A grandson, developer David Walkowski, bought Ballast Key from the U.S. Navy in 1974, uninhabited, 8 miles off Key West, the southernmost point of land in the contiguous United States. He built a large still house and a guest house on the island and entertained many famous friends there, including Ernest Hemingway. The island was the site of the 1989 James Bond book and movie, if you recall, License to Kill. 007 landed on the island and called Mr. Walkowski to say, David, it's James Bond. I've broken into your island. I hope you don't mind. Walkowski's Island was the last remaining privately held part of President Theodore Roosevelt's 1908 preserve and breeding ground for nesting wading birds and other wildlife. In 2018, Walkowski, the environmentalist, donated his land to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Marine and Coastal Research and Education while preserving its natural resources. Jews have been prominent in Florida's hotel industry. Harris Rosen was Florida's largest independent hotelier. He founded his hotel and resorts in 1974 in Orlando and became an important philanthropist supporting education for underserved communities. Aaron Lansky writes in his book Outwitting History that Harris Rosen helped support student interns at your Yiddish book center. Look at this view of Miami Beach hotels, the Eden Rock and Fontainebleau in the foreground, and realize that those two and so many others were built by Jews, including the Art Deco hotels. By 1970, the Art Deco hotels were falling into disrepair. 20,000 Eastern European retirees, mainly garment workers, teachers, and unionists who were Holocaust survivors who all spoke Yiddish, flocked to these hotels because of the very low rates and warm winters amidst palm trees. The 2 square mile area south of 21st Street became literally a shtetl by the sea. Their bedrooms were their kingdom. They created shuls in the lobbies of these old Art Deco hotels with the luxury of always having a minion. Life for them was great for a while, Those still living were forced out in the 1970s with the Art Deco preservation movement, and real estate values escalated. And then the final blow in 1980 when the crime element of the Cuban Mariels settled in that same neighborhood and the elderly Jews were no longer safe. I am often asked, why is there a photo of a cruise ship on the cover of my book? They are major economic drivers for our state, bringing in more than $8 billion annually. Florida is the nation's #1 cruise state. There are three major public cruise lines, and all three are chaired by Floridian Jews: Carnival, Norwegian, and Royal Caribbean. It is acknowledged that maintaining Jewish traditions has been vital in sustaining our heritage. Jewish communal organizations are formed to perpetuate Jewish life, culture, and traditions to help ensure Jewish continuity. Florida's first Jewish organization was the 1857 Jacksonville Cemetery, founded after 6 members of that Delinsky family died during a yellow fever epidemic. Until that time, bodies had been shipped out of state for burial. An example of passing on tradition is observing the Jewish holidays. Beginning in 1880, Purim balls were held in the pioneer Jewish communities of Tallahassee, Pensacola, Key West, and Jacksonville. Here in Jacksonville in 1918, on the right, Fannie Moss spent months collecting all those seashells to make this dress for a Purim party. That outfit is now in the collection of the Jewish Museum of Florida, as all the other things that I've mentioned. On the cover of my book is this 1920 photo of a couple on an alligator in the top left. Gertrude and David Moses were founders of Temple Israel, the first Jewish congregation in Palm Beach, where David owned a florist shop on Worth Avenue. Gertrude was the daughter of Rosa Benjamin and Jacob Katz, who had a large wedding in Micanopy in 1886. At the bottom are their wedding photos. On the right, you see the large article that was on the front page of the Micanopy Gazette in 1886. Obviously, it was a big deal in 1886, probably the first Jewish wedding held in Micanopy. Michelle O'Connor in the top right, an internationally renowned artist and author whose work spans 5 decades, was born on Miami Beach in 1945. Donna absorbed the natural world growing around her in Miami Beach. The breadth of her art encompasses sculpture, public art, furniture, jewelry, and functional objects. A walk on the beach, which you see in the lower left, is a floor, part of a floor and part of the Miami International Airport. It is composed of more than 9,000 bronzes embedded in terrazzo with mother of pearl. This is the kind of stuff she does. Her father, shown on the left, was a judge and a mayor in Miami Beach. That's Ken Oka's campaign poster for mayor of Miami Beach in 1957, and as you can tell, it's in Yiddish, reflecting the population of Miami Beach at that time. Jews have been largely represented in politics in Florida. The first Jewish mayor of more than 200 in Florida was Henry Brash, shown in the center. Elected in 1879, he served 3 terms in Marianna, then moved to Tampa with his family, shown here. Many early Jewish mayors were Jewish, as they were respected, trusted, good speakers, and considered highly educated. Florida has had one Jewish governor, Daytona's David Schultz, inaugurated in 1933. This historic photo was taken on February 15, 1933. Schultz, shown in the center, is with President-elect Franklin Roosevelt, shown on the left, and Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak. Cermak was fatally shot in the Roosevelt assassination attempt at Bayfront Park in Miami in that year, 1933. Giuseppe Zangara was convicted of the murder and electrocuted in just 1 month. David Schultz served as governor for 4 years. A dynamic public speaker, he took the reins of state governor when the worst effects of the Depression were being felt. He paid the bills, distributed free school books, gave more money to schools, and started commissions to serve the public good. We've had more than 300 Jewish judges in Florida. 5 Jews have served on Florida's Supreme Court. All served as Chief Justice except Robert Luck on the lower right, who serves as a judge today on the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. There had been a disproportionate amount of Floridian Jews who contributed to the arts, from music conductor Michael Tilson Thomas, founder of the New World Symphony on Miami Beach in 1987, to sculptor Frank Eliscu of Sarasota, who created the Heisman Trophy to honor the best in college football, to composer and lyricist Jerry Herman of Hello Dolly, Mame, and La Cage aux Folles fame, who went to the University of Miami and lived and died on Miami Beach, to graphic artist Will Eisner of Fort Lauderdale, who created The Spirit, an early graphic comic in 1940. His career spans 70 years from the dawn of comic books to the advent of digital comics. There are so many more I don't have time for. As I have shown you, Jews have contributed largely to the history of Florida in every sphere. Jews are tenacious, proud, creative, hardworking people. Even though Jews are less than 1/4 of 1% of the global population, Jews have been awarded 22% of all the Nobel Prizes. Two of those Nobels have been awarded to Floridian Jews. On the left, you see Marshall Nierenberg of Orlando, a 1948 graduate of the University of Florida, receiving the 1968 Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology for interpretation of the genetic code and its function in protein synthesis. He died in January of 2010, and his wife donated his papers to the Jewish Museum of Florida. And of course, on the right, you recognize a leading figure in the Yiddish literary movement, Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was the first Yiddish writer to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. It was 1978, and in his acceptance speech, he noted the language was despised by both Gentiles and emancipated Jews because it was different. Yiddish, he said, has not yet said its last word. And what Aaron Lansky accomplished in saving the books and creating the Jewish Book Center is proof of that. Singer lived in Surfside, Florida, where there is a street named for him, and where Sheldon Drugs was located, his hangout, where he learned he had earned the Nobel. At the University of Miami, there is a full academic scholarship named in his honor, and the Jewish Museum of Florida has a collection of his personal items. Jews are like cut flowers. We die without roots. These stories are our collective historic memories, our roots. What I learned is that history is people. History helps us understand society and changes. Our memories of history are what defines us. We need to hear the stories, preserve them, and pass them down to those who follow us. The stories of people inspire us to take action in our own lives. I have shared less than 1% of the stories I gathered and less than 10% of the photos in my book. In summary, my book about Jews coming to America and Florida is a long time coming testament to the contributions of Florida Jews and crucial to understanding Florida, American, and American Jewish history. And like the show Hamilton ends with the line, America, you are an unfinished symphony. The story of the Florida Jewish experience continues. I Shanam Dank for sharing time with me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for telling, I think, a very lesser known story about Florida. I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions because we're getting close to closing time, which picks up on the fact that you only were able to share a small percentage of stories. How hard was it to research and find these stories?
Well, considering that no one had done any research because the scholars up east thought that the whole history was Miami Beach post World War II condo commandos and who cared, nobody had documented anything. So it was like starting from scratch, like Aaron Lansky did. His was global, mine was state. But as I mentioned, I set up these were all volunteers. I set up volunteer task forces in 32 communities around Florida. I'm an organized person. Process is very important to me. So I set up these volunteer task forces, recruited people, had to convince them this was a worthwhile project to devote their time. And I set up an outline for them, what to do, how to do it, developed a oral history outline. And for 8 years, I went around from community to community, moving these committees along and processing them. It was before the days of computers when I started, so I had to keep everything on a legal pad. And then finally, a 10-year-old kid taught me in the mid 1980s, the little Macintosh came out, and a 10-year-old kid taught me how to make a database. So it was really challenging, really hard. But as I mentioned in the beginning, Jewish continuity has always been my passion since fifth grade. And I've always worked for that. And I just had to make it happen.
And speaking of continuity, I mean, I think myself and many others, think of snowbirds as the sort of beginning generations of Jews coming to Florida. And you tell a really rich, deep story that goes way back. Curious, how many families that go back more than two, three, four generations are still in Florida?
Well, I mentioned the Delinskys. They're the oldest, and they have 8 generations that are still in Florida, still in Jacksonville. That's the oldest. But there are many families, like I mentioned, people think that there's no one that could have grandparents that lived, born in Florida, live, but there are many. There are several hundred.
And do you know how many of these immigrants came to Florida? Was it known as a place of opportunity?
Well, it's interesting. When the Ellis Island Museum opened in New York, that was the first time I realized that Jews could come directly into Florida from Europe. I thought everyone came through Ellis Island, or what it was called before that. Um, but Jews could come directly. It was at the Ellis Island Museum. I discovered that Jacksonville and Key West were ports of immigration.
Mm.
So many European Jews came into Jacksonville or Key West directly from Europe.
Interesting. So this segues well into, although I live in New York and I am a 1979 grad of UF, since the 1970s, I've spent time where few New York Jews have gone before. Just returned last week from Shell Point Beach, 35 miles south of Tallahassee. Besides I-95 in the 1970s, why do you think Tallahassee and west to the Panhandle, the Forgotten Coast, has attracted so few Jews?
Well, it was the first place Jews went. And it's an interesting story about Tallahassee that this person might be. How is Tallahassee created as a center, as the capital of the state? This is honestly what happened. Two people, not Jews, were put on horseback at either sides of the state, and where they decided where they met, that would be the state capital.
Huh.
That's how Tallahassee became the state capital. So Jews migrate to wherever there's an economic opportunity. Because it was a state capital that was created in 1824 and Pensacola was in 1763, they were places of commerce. So that's why Jews went there. Lately, they go now to South Florida because that's the majority. The Jews like to go where their like kind is. So most of the Jews are now in, like I mentioned, Boca Raton is the largest Jewish community today. Used to be Miami. When I started the project, it was Miami. There were
Mm.
over 300,000 Jews in Miami when I started in the 80s. Today, there are about 120,000 Jews in Miami. There are many more in Palm Beach County.
Someone's asking, is there a Cuban Jewish community in Florida?
Absolutely. In fact, we did a whole exhibit on that. Jews, when they left when Fidel Castro came to power, many 10,000 of them came to Florida, and they had their own synagogue, they had their own everything, and the reason for that is very, very sad. They were not accepted by the Miami Jewish community. The Federation did not accept them. No one accepted them, so they formed their own organizations. But eventually, they became part. They would became integrated into the general Jewish Federation and other organizations. But they were very. They still have their. They have two, of course, separate Sephardic and Ashkenazic Cuban congregations still functioning in Miami Beach.
And was there one story that set you on this trajectory?
Well, the most important story to me was the Delinsky family that I said because they're the oldest. And when I found that pocket watch, I mean, I think a lot of people don't understand there was no collection. A lot of people think that what I did was just put together a collection that already existed. There was nothing. There were no stories. There was nothing. So when I went to Jacksonville and got this watch, and this woman took me to the bank and said, nobody knows in the family that I even have it. That's what it dawned on me. There must be other things like this around that nobody, if her own family doesn't know, certainly the community doesn't know. So that's what really got me really hot.
Wait, I mean, I think you've done an incredible job in finding these, and I think material culture and objects tell larger stories. And I would like to ask you, if I may, about the dress. I saw that when I was at the museum. the Purim. Well, I didn't, yeah. It's just spectacular. How did you come by that?
Well, a man, when I went, I had task forces in every community, as I mentioned. I had a
Mhm.
really good one in Jacksonville because the history there is very, very rich. And there was a man on the committee that was it was his grandmother. And in one of the meetings, people think that what they have is it's important to them. They don't think anybody else is interested.
Mm.
Well, I have my grandmother's dress, and his name was Moss, and probably originally Moskowitz. And he brought it to me and showed it to me. And that was during the traveling. I didn't mention because I didn't have time. Before I had the museum, I put together a traveling exhibit with all this stuff, and that
Mhm.
traveled from 1990 to 1994 all around the state, 13 cities. And then I took it to Washington to the B'nai B'rith Museum. I took it to Philadelphia to the Jewish Museum there. And that's when we decided, oh, we need to do a museum. That's because people were really interested. So I asked if I could borrow that dress and the pocket watch for the traveling exhibition. And then when we decided to open a museum, I had to go back to all of these families and say, okay, you were so kind to loan it to us. Will you now donate it to us for the museum? So that's how and I have to tell you another interesting story. When I moved to St. Petersburg after I retired from the museum on Miami Beach, I went to a dentist and his name was Frank Moss.
Mhm.
And I had never met the man. He was recommended to me. And I said, before I even opened my mouth, I said, I just have to ask you because of who I am and what I do. Are you from Jacksonville? And he said, yes. How would you know that? And I said, well, are you related to Fanny Moss and Jack? He said, that was my grandmother. So it was, it was just, so I told him who I was. And so the next appointment, I had to bring in the catalog and I had to bring in and then he had a whole garage full of stuff from the family that he then donated to the museum. So the stories just don't ever end. I mean, every
Mhm.
day, that's what I love about what you do and what I do. It's people. And
Yeah.
as I said, people is history, and it's the connection to these people that keeps my juices going.
Right. And the stories behind the people and the objects bring the whole culture to life. I mean, I think that's what we've realized in our Yiddish a Global Culture exhibition. Um, Quick question, did you do any research on E.L. Königsberg? Is that a name that means anything to you?
Well, my maiden name is Königsberg. That's why I
Oh.
was talking about. Uh,
Okay.
Mine was pronounced Kenningsburg. When they came from the old country. They took the umlaut off the O and put in an E. But no, I did not because I don't. Did he have any connection to Florida?
Someone's just asking.
I'm not aware. I'm not aware that he
Okay.
had a connection to Florida.
Okay.
If he did, please let me know and I'll research it.
Okay. Before we let you go, somebody's asking for your contact information again. I think it was on your
That was on the
last
last
slide.
slide.
Yeah.
It's
You can write to us at programs@yiddishbookcenter.org and we will connect you
I
if you
would
have
love
questions.
questions. I
Yeah.
really welcome inquiries
Okay.
in any form.
And more of those shell dresses. Have discussed Latin Jewish communities in South Florida. Also say something more, if you would, about Sephardic Jews in Florida.
There is like I mentioned, there's a Sephardic congregation, Temple Moses on Miami Beach. And the majority, in fact, one of the men, I'm thinking of him, there were great leaders from Florida who were organizers and leaders of the national movement for Sephardic jewelry. So yes, the first Jews that came here were Sephardic. The
Hmm.
Moroccan, the Jew, the Moses Levy, who
Hmm.
started the plantation, was from Morocco. He was a Sephardic Jew.
Um, One quick one, because I think this might be the last one. Have you researched the connections of the Jewish mob, including Meyer Lansky, to Florida? I noted the window in the Jewish Museum with the engraved name Meyer Lansky.
Yes, he was a member of that synagogue. And when I discovered the synagogue, it was in terrible shape. It had been just vandalized and it was mold and termite eating the floor was all collapsing. But there was this stained glass window that said Meyer Lansky. And everybody knows. In fact, of all the lectures I do, people really like Meyer Lansky. I didn't mention I had to eliminate a lot of stuff. But yes, he was a member of that shul. He moved to Miami Beach. He operated the Cuban hotels, and his mob's activities there from Miami Beach. He was known to be at the delicatessens, Wolfie's. He hung out there. I interviewed his wife, and she was lovely. And yes, in fact, his daughter who lived in Tampa, Florida, wrote a book about him. I think it's called The King, something about the King, My Father the King or something. Yes, I did a lot of research on Meyer Lansky. There have been many books written about Meyer Lansky and his Florida connection.
Marcia Joe, thank you so much. Once again, for our audience, can you hold up the book, which is extremely heavy, but testament to why it's such a great book. I
Five
schlepped
pounds.
it all the way home, and it weighed a lot. It tells
It's
great
available. It's
stories.
available on Amazon if
Yeah.
anybody wants to get.
So you don't have to carry it home in your suitcase like I did. Great work. Continue on telling these stories. And thanks again for joining us this evening.
Thank you for inviting me. It was my pleasure.
Great. I also want to thank this evening's producer behind the scenes, Oren Koffler, who really keeps things going for us and makes sure there's no blips. Special thanks to all of you in the audience, our members, who make our ongoing work possible and support that makes our public programs possible. If you'd like to learn more about how you can add to your support or become a member if you're not, or renew your membership. YiddishBookCenter.org/donate. Please join us in person at the Yiddish Book Center or via live stream on Sunday, June 14th at 2 p.m. for Dual Identities, Living in Meyer's Shadow with Arthur M. Horowitz, an amazing memoir about being the son of a Holocaust survivor. To learn more and to register for all of our upcoming events, visit yiddishbookcenter.org/events, where you'll find our full schedule of upcoming events, which includes Yidstock, our festival of new Yiddish music, July 9 through 12. Don't want to miss that. And I look forward to welcoming you back to our virtual theater or to our theater in person in Amherst, Massachusetts. Until then, stay well, stay happy, and stay tuned. Take care.